When you step into the booth tomorrow and vote for a judge, what's behind your choice?
This is the American Law Journal, made possible in part by Blank Rome, strategic advice for employers in today's workplace. Cozen O'Connor, a top 100 U.S. law firm. Scheller, helping individuals in personal injury and product liability matters for over 30 years. Martin Banks, Pennsylvania's largest workers' compensation practice. Hahalis and Canupis, representing employees in wrongful termination and discrimination matters, and the Legal Intelligencer, the nation's oldest legal newspaper for lawyers.
4 judicial candidates, only 2 on tomorrow's ballot, will get elected to Pennsylvania's Supreme Court. We'll talk to all 4 of them tonight. Also later, Hank Gretzlack, editor-in-chief of the Legal Intelligencer, tells us why this judicial election passes the so what test. Good evening. Welcome to the program. I'm Christopher Naughton. Shira Goodman is with me tonight on the set with Pennsylvanians for Modern Courts. She's also on the editorial board of the Legal Intelligencer. She will assist me tonight in questioning the candidates. Good to have you here tonight, first off, Shira. Secondly, there are going to be not 4, but 5 judicial candidates on that ballot tomorrow. Let's explain what that's about.
Sure. There's 2 vacancies on our Supreme Court, and we have 4 candidates running and competing for those 2 seats. 2 are nominated by each of the major political parties. But there's a 5th Supreme Court justice, Justice Thomas Saylor, who's been on the court for quite a while now, who is running for retention, which is a nonpartisan yes-no vote on whether he should be retained to serve for another 10 years.
Right, and I see the smile already curling up around your lips, because that used to be just a formality, more or less a rubber stamp. But given some of the political climate of the last few years here in the state of Pennsylvania, no longer so.
Right. In 2005, for the first time, we had an appellate court judge, actually a Supreme Court Justice, Russell Nigro, failed to win retention, and the person who ran with him at the time, Justice Newman, won by a very narrow margin. So things are uncertain in Pennsylvania regarding retention right now.
Right. So we'll wait and see tomorrow. So Justice Saylor, even though he seemed, in his opinion, his dissenting opinion in a famous the Stilt case in Pennsylvania, seemed to be on the side of Pennsylvania Clean Sweep and some other groups that chastise the justices for their position on the pay raise, may find himself out the door too if they do not retain him. If he doesn't get more than 50%, is that the break-even point?
He needs 50% yes vote.
All right. Judge Seamus McCaffery is not here with this panel tonight due to ostensibly logistical problems. I conducted a one-on-one interview with Justice McCaffery. We'll see that a little bit later in tonight's program. You're not going to get a chance to ask Judge McCaffery a question, Shira. So what would you ask him, or let's put it this way, how would you assess his candidacy so far?
Judge McCaffery is a great campaigner. He's raising a lot of money. I'd want to talk about that. I hope we'll talk with the other candidates. I would talk to him about his experience and ask him what's different from his opponents.
Well, one thing he would definitely disagree with you and Pennsylvanians for Modern Courts is that you folks believe that tomorrow's election should not be, that one day you're hoping the state of Pennsylvania will not be electing its judges.
Right. We're hoping to move to a merit selection system for the appellate courts, which would include the Supreme Court, of course. We think that the problem of money in elections has just become unbearable and intolerable. The millions of dollars raised by these candidates, it's coming mostly from lawyers and parties who do come before them in the courts later. And although we do have a very qualified group of candidates here with us tonight and running on tomorrow's ballot, there's nothing in our laws that requires that we have such qualified candidates. Basically, anybody with a law degree who's lived here for a year can run for a seat on our Supreme Court.
Some, of course, might suggest that sends a bad message to the citizens of Pennsylvania that we somehow don't trust them in this voting process. Is electing a judge, especially a Supreme Court justice, something that should not be in the hands of a voter?
Oh, I trust the voters. I think voters are very smart. I think people want information. I think they're frustrated that they don't know enough about the courts and about these candidates. What you have to remember is judges are different from other elected officials. They are not supposed to represent constituencies. They're not supposed to bend to the popular will, do what's politically expedient, make campaign promises, and keep them on the bench. They are supposed to be fair and impartial and uphold the law.
Well, on that note of politics, let's go ahead and turn to the candidates. Debra Todd is a Superior Court judge From Western Pennsylvania, she is running as a Democrat. Maureen Lally-Green is a Superior Court judge as well. Hailing also from Western PA, she is a Republican candidate. And Michael Krancer is a former administrative law judge with the Environmental Hearing Board. He is from Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania, and is running as a Republican. Let me go to you first, Judge Lally-Green. Do you think somehow that in a state, in a nation that may be trending more Democratic simply because of the politics in this nation and in this state over the last half dozen years or so, that it is somewhat of a liability that people may not know about your sterling record as a jurist, and they're going to pull the lever for someone who just simply has a D after their name as opposed to you running as a Republican?
I have been traveling this state, and my impression of the citizens is that the citizens, like Shira was saying, are very, very well, very interested in this election. Once they start being educated a bit about what the Supreme Court is about.
So you believe that they can get past party affiliation?
I certainly believe that. I think their concerns, the resounding concern is that a candidate have the experience for the position of justice, have a reputation for honesty, for integrity, for trustworthiness, and for impartiality and fairness in decision making. And they want to know that the person they're looking at has a commitment to serving the public, to being a public servant, and to complying with the Constitution. These are the constant themes throughout the Commonwealth that I've heard.
Judge Krancer, more or less the same type of question for you. I mean, especially in the last, I would say, decade or so, people have become a little bit more familiar with our United States Supreme Court justices, and most lawyers and many lay people would say, oh, he's a conservative justice, she's a liberal justice, that sort of thing. How do you as a judge get around that once you start making opinions?
Well, the people have heard from me for the last couple of years. I've been on the road, and they know where I stand, and they know what I believe in, and they know what I don't believe in. I've spoken about the issues from day one. I've been very candid about that. And the voters will make a choice tomorrow, and an important one, and everybody that I've come into contact with, the citizens of Pennsylvania, recognize how important the Supreme Court is to the citizens and the everyday life of Pennsylvanians.
Judge Todd, do you think you go in with a leg up because you've got the D after your name?
Well, this year it is a very different political environment than we've had in the past. I've always been proud to be a Democrat. I'm certainly proud to be a Democratic nominee for the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, but I do believe that my appeal goes beyond partisan lines. I think that the judicial races are focused on qualifications, and I think that the voters want to find judges who have integrity, who are impartial, and who have appellate experience. So I believe that in addition to party affiliation, voters are going to be looking at the individual candidates, and I'm very proud of my record of over 25 years of legal and judicial experience, and having been rated highly recommended by the Pennsylvania Bar.
Okay, let me change it up a little bit. Start with you, Judge Lally-Green. Let's talk about the money. This group of candidates for tomorrow's Supreme Court seats has raised many millions of dollars. The bulk of this money comes from lawyers and law firms that are likely to appear before the court sometime in the future when two of you are sitting on the court. What do you tell voters about that, and will you recuse if you have a contributor who's arguing a case before you, or who's briefing a case before you, or whose client has given money to you?
The reality of running a statewide campaign is that one must have funds in order to communicate with the citizens. It's just a fact of life. And when it comes to fundraising, my campaign has, like each of the other campaigns, has made outreach to various communities, some of whom, of course, are the lawyers. Now, a lot of the reality in that is that the lawyers have an interest in the Supreme Court. They work within the court system, and so they care about good government. And I have a wide range of support across the Commonwealth with respect to fundraising. But you know something, and I think this is something that the citizens are beginning to realize. Once a campaign is done, we, the judges, take off the hat of a campaigner and we put the hat on of a judge. And we do what we're supposed to do as a judge within the confines of what the Constitution wants us to do. And the question of recusal will come up, and it's a case-by-case issue that we look at. And for me, it is actually a two-part question. The first part is there a conflict? And if there is, of course, I would recuse. And the second question is, in this case, is there a perception that fairness and impartiality cannot occur? And I have to make that decision as each case comes along. Number one concern is that the people appearing before us have confidence in the fairness and the impartiality of the jurist making the decision.
Well, let me ask you, Judge Krancer, about that perception, because a lot of polls here in Pennsylvania and across the nation, even including polls of judges, say that there is a perception that campaign contributions do influence decisions. Even if it's not accurate, there is that dangerous perception. What do you say when you hear that?
Well, unfortunately, perception is reality, and that's something we have to deal with. We can say until we're blue in the face that that's not true, but perception is reality. My campaign contribution list does not contain a majority of lawyers who will appear before me. I have a very supportive family, and they will not be appearing before the Supreme Court as far as I can tell. And obviously, if they did, I would recuse myself. But perception is reality, and that is a problem that we have to deal with.
And Judge Todd, your feelings on recusal from campaign contributors?
Well, I've been down this road before, as has Judge Lally-Green and as has Judge McCaffery, since we already have run for office and been elected to the Pennsylvania Superior Court. So I had to deal with that issue when I ran for election and was elected to the Superior Court in 1999. And I've established a policy whereby if a contributor comes before my court as a party, I do recuse, because whether or not I would have a bias, I would not want there to be an appearance of impropriety, even if I was totally unbiased, as I always try to be. If the party has been a contributor to my campaign, I do not feel it's appropriate that I hear their case.
Let me change direction just a little bit here. The Supreme Court in the state of Pennsylvania has in some ways suffered a black eye in the last few years, whether it's deserved or undeserved, although the interesting upside to this might be is that people are really starting to pay attention. But I know that all three of you have stated that one of the primary hallmarks of your ascending to the bench, the Supreme Court, is going to be to rehabilitate the image. Judge Krancer, how do you go about doing that?
Well, again, perception is reality. There are perceptions out there that the Supreme Court needs to be brought closer to the people, and you really need to go no further than Justice Castile's dissent in the casino case lately, where he said the Supreme Court had an incredible arrogation of power, and arrogation is a derivative word of arrogant. My court, as many people know, did not get the pay raise. So I didn't get the pay raise. I know where to go to get a pay raise. I'll go back to private practice to get a pay raise. But that is a big issue out there. It still is. And transparency and openness is all part of that. I want to make public rulemaking. I want all rulemaking in public. I want all written opinions. I do want the TV cameras into the courtroom. And I want outreach by justices. I want justices to go out and feel the pulse of the people by visiting schools, by visiting civic groups, and learning and educating at the same time. So that
sounds more like the role of a politician than a jurist, though, no?
I totally disagree with that. I think that part of the problem today of the estrangement between the people in the courts and the court with a capital C is that the people never see these people. There's never any interaction. So a double education where we could go out and educate the people, students, civic groups, as to what courts do, and at the same time learn from the people, I think would be extremely well taken by the public at this particular point in time.
Judge Todd, how do you go about rehabilitating the court's image if indeed it does need that? I think you said and stated in some of the questionnaires that you believe it does.
Well, I think it certainly needs some help because the judiciary is under scrutiny right now, and maybe that's a silver lining of this whole pay raise debacle, that people are taking a closer look at the judiciary, and they're seeing that there are many hardworking public servants out there as their common pleas court judges, as their Superior and Supreme Court judges and justices. I think there are two ways I would go about trying to rehabilitate the image of the Supreme Court justices. One is by airing the PCN coverage of the arguments. The way we do in the Pennsylvania Superior Court, we air the arguments and the public gets to see what goes on. I do believe that we ought to have cameras in the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. Let's televise the lawyers' arguments and the justices' questions and let the public see how hard we work. The second way is by putting this pay raise scandal behind us. I do believe, as the public did, that the legislative process was tainted, and that's why I made the personal decision to give my pay raise back, and I did give it back in 2006, and I continue to make periodic payments returning my pay raise.
And Judge Lally-Green, what effective steps do you take to rehabilitate this court and the image of this court?
I think that, and that of course is my greatest concern, is that we improve the public's confidence in the system. In addition to what some of my two colleagues have said here, you know, there are great pluses in the opportunity to educate the public, whether it be through PCN airing of our Supreme Court, airing of the Supreme Court arguments, or other kinds of educational programs. The public really does want to know more about us. Number two, the whole area of openness and transparency, and I'll add another word, accountability. Not only can the citizens see what we do, but they can also see how we do what we do, and then what we do is consistent with what the Constitution wants us to do.
The Supreme Court of the state has power to address a lot of issues regarding lawyers, regarding the justice system, regarding the entire court system. What do you think should be the top priority of the Supreme Court starting in January? What needs fixing in our system? Judge Lally-Green?
I would just follow through on what I was talking about in terms of access. I think as the Supreme Court, we have to make sure that the system works as it should for the citizens.
Judge Todd, what do you think?
I would focus on efficiency and handling more cases, accepting more cases on the a la carte or docket, so that the Supreme Court, in addition to its administrative function, spends more time on the law, clarifying the law of the Commonwealth, and turning around decisions in a much quicker manner.
And Judge Krancer?
Boils down to attitude. I think justices and judges have to remember that they work for the people and that the people are their bosses.
Thank you, one and all. I want to thank Debra Todd from Western Pennsylvania Superior Court Judge, running as a Democrat in tomorrow's election. Maureen Lally-Green, also a Superior Court Judge from Allegheny County, I believe, Western PA. She is a Republican candidate. And Michael Krancer, an administrative law judge from Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania, running as a Republican. And Shira Goodman, thanks, Shira, for joining me tonight as quickly as this went. Pennsylvania for Modern Courts, where can they find them online?
www.pmconline.org, and this year we've created a chart for things voters should consider when voting for judges and justices, and places where you can get information to answer those questions.
Good. Coming up, Judge Seamus McCaffery pleads his case as to why he should be elected to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. And then the legal intelligencer's Hank Gretzlack explains what's riding on your vote. First, here's what's coming up over the next 3 weeks on the American Law Journal, and then a few thank yous for making tonight's programming possible.
The American Law Journal is made possible in part by Blank Rome, strategic advice for employers in today's workplace. Cozen O'Connor, a top 100 U.S. law firm. Scheller, helping individuals in personal injury and product liability matters for over 30 years. Martin Banks, Pennsylvania's largest workers' compensation practice. Hahalis and Canupus, representing employees in wrongful termination and discrimination matters. And the Legal Intelligencer, the nation's oldest legal newspaper for lawyers.
Joining us now is Judge Seamus McCaffery. He is a Pennsylvania Superior Court Judge. And he's a Philadelphia native, born and bred, and former policeman in that city, 40 years now in the Pennsylvania legal system. He is running as a Democrat. Judge McCaffery, thank you for joining us tonight.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Why should people going to the polls tomorrow, let's face it, many people going to the polls tomorrow, going to that voting booth, are going to pull that lever based on the letter after the judge's name. You're running as a Democrat. There are 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans. Are we kidding ourselves as voters that judges really can separate their political views from the decisions they make on the bench?
Well, I think just like separation of parties, there's separation of powers. It's not my inclination to run as a Democrat. In reality, in the county system, you can run as a Democrat and as a Republican. You're allowed to cross-file. As a matter of fact, I think that cross-filing is the proper way to do it here in Pennsylvania. But as I'm sure most of your viewers know, years ago, our House and Senate passed legislation requiring judges to file and run under one ticket, either Democrat or Republican. And I don't really see party labels as being an issue because, quite candidly, I've been described as the best thing for cross-party voters across Pennsylvania. I've been received by both Democrats and Republicans.
So we're talking about judicial independence as well. It's a big issue. And I know that earlier this year, the Legal Intelligencer sent out a 32-point questionnaire for all the Supreme Court candidates. You were the only one who did not answer that particular questionnaire. Here's what you said: having set forth my fundamental belief in judicial independence, upon which I stake my reputation, I have respectfully declined to answer the individual questions posed by the Legal Intelligencer in this questionnaire. In fact, my declination is a reflection of how important I believe it is to maintain my judicial independence. I've looked at the questionnaire, Judge. There are a lot of innocuous questions on that questionnaire. Why did you refuse to answer those questions?
Well, your opinion may be innocuous, but in my opinion, looking at those questions, I quite frankly didn't want to put in writing anything that subsequent to that, I could end up having someone come in front of me and throw up a questionnaire that they pulled up off the internet saying, Judge, in this questionnaire, you answered the following. And quite frankly, I think that that is a blatant breach of what I consider to be my ability to render a decision
Judge,
on a case without so much as, having someone feel that, oh, he's already predisposed to a specific thought process, and I don't want people to think that way.
Well, certainly, if anything, that would impinge upon your decision you may render from the bench later on. I think certainly the public understands you're declining those types of questions, but questions about judicial philosophy, what's the biggest trap or mistake a judge can make, what in your background has prepared you for being a judge, aren't those legitimate questions? And if they aren't legitimate questions, then why do the other justice or the other candidates for Supreme Court justice answer those questions? What is it that you understand about judicial independence that they don't?
Well, you just said a second ago, what makes my background make me more qualified or less qualified to be a judge? Well, again, quite frankly, I've been a judge for 14 years, so I don't even think that particular question is appropriate. And as far as the other judges or applicants for the position or role of a Supreme Court justice, you're going to have to ask them, because in my review of it, and not just Seamus McCaffery's review, but in a lot of other lawyers that I trust, we looked at that and we felt, this really isn't worth putting ourselves on paper for. I stand on my record. My record's on the internet. Anyone wants to read my opinions, just go to superiorcourt.gov and you can pick them all out.
The Pennsylvania Bar Association gave you a recommended rating that gave other judges such as Lally-Green and Todd highly recommended. Why do you think that is?
Well, I found it very astonishing personally because, quite frankly, of all the judges running for Supreme Court, I'm the only one right now, literally, who has been not only a practicing lawyer, but a trial judge for 10 years, an appellate court judge for 4 years, and an administrative judge appointed by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. So between trial judge, administrative judge, and Superior Court or appellate court judge, it's somewhat astonishing. The only thing I can think of is because of my non-traditional way of coming up, having been a police officer and gone to school at night, I didn't have the opportunity to go to the big firms, and I suspect that's part of it.
Pennsylvania Clean Sweep is a grassroots group that wants to essentially clear out Supreme Court justices that they don't agree with. What encourages you or discourages you about their movement?
Well, again, I think that you're talking about individuals that, for whatever their agenda may be, in this particular situation, I think most of it has to do with the pay raise issue. When you have groups or organizations that try to get people pretty much focusing on getting rid of a jurist because of one specific issue, by the way, one issue that may not have anything to do with that judge in question, I think that that's pretty much misinformed and not the proper way to go about not only electing but retaining our judges, because so many of them are absolutely outstanding jurists. And I think that the people should really look beyond that and look at the actual judge's record.
Well, certainly there have been a lot of negative perceptions about the court, especially the Supreme Court of the state of Pennsylvania. What role do you think that a justice that's going to be elected to this august group should do to change or augment the opinion or the reputation of this court in the eyes of Pennsylvania citizens?
I think transparency first and foremost. I think cameras in courtrooms during hearings for the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania. When I was a trial judge in Philadelphia, I was a big advocate for putting cameras in courtrooms on certain cases, specifically the quality of life types of cases. But last but not least, I really think, and I will if I'm elected, be one of those justices that continue to stay out in the community, talking to community groups. In my last 4 years as an appellate court judge, I've made it a point to travel across Pennsylvania and speak at so many groups and so many organizations about judicial independence. And I think what I found was when people see and hear a justice and get an opportunity to have a dialogue with them, they understand and appreciate the courts far better.
And you very definitely believe in the voting process. Pennsylvania is in the minority across this country, but you believe voting for judges, whether it's Superior Court judge, whether it's a Court of Common Pleas, Supreme Court justice, that Pennsylvanians should have the right to vote.
Absolutely, unequivocally, I think Pennsylvanians would be foolish to do away with their right to vote. Unlike some states where the governor, the chief executive, appoints the chief jurist, I don't agree with that. I think the Constitution says we need a separation of powers. And when you have the governor or elected officials appointing our judges, that's going to be suspect in my mind.
All right, Judge Seamus McCaffery, Superior Court Judge from the state of Pennsylvania, thank you for joining us. Good luck, Judge.
Thank you.
Here now is Hank Gretzlack, the editor-in-chief of the Legal Intelligencer, and his perspective on tomorrow's election.
The Pennsylvania judicial election will be the most important one in more than a decade. 2 seats are open on the state Supreme Court. 2 new justices could radically alter the court's direction. That means more than who's raised the most money or who's known as the Eagles Court judge. Judicial elections are serious affairs, particularly ones for the Supreme Court. The court's decisions affect every citizen of Pennsylvania. And there's a strong chance that a single justice will have a bigger and longer lasting impact on your life than any governor or mayor. Think about it. Judicial candidates shouldn't be expected to make promises, but they can and should provide their views on prior court rulings. That way, voters get to make an informed choice. Judicial candidates are allowed to express their views, and a recent federal court decision makes it even easier for them to do so. There's no reason for a judicial candidate to hide his or her general positions. Now, electing judges is not ideal. Candidates are forced to raise large sums of money, often from the very lawyers who might appear before them. But unfortunately, change on that front isn't going to happen anytime soon. In the meantime, the candidates, the media, and the public can do a lot more to make it a substantive race rather than a superficial one. After all, we all have a huge stake in the outcome. And that's my perspective. For the American Law Journal and the Legal Intelligencer, I'm Hank Gretzlack.
Thank you, Hank. If you need more information on tonight's program or any program that we broadcast here at the American Law Journal, go to our website, AmericanLawJournalTV.com, LawJournalTV.com. If you need more information, call us toll-free, 888-78-LAW-TV. Write to us at info@LawJournalTV.com. Go to the website, get your law on demand. I'm Christopher Naughton. Thanks for being here. We'll catch you next week.
An election officer will place a ballot card in the right position and start the ballot process. Next, touch the language of your choice, if applicable. To begin voting, carefully touch the Touch Here to Start box located underneath the center of your screen.